And I look at that, and so now I'm in my mid-30s, and easily I must have, I've probably done 25, 30, 35,000 hours of coaching on the field. Yet I meet other people who maybe have their A license or have their pro license, and they've maybe not done a quarter of that. And I'm sort of thinking, but that's where you learn to become a coach.
The VAR Show. The one place for your weekly football update.
Hola, very warm welcome to the VAR Show, the show which talks about all the various major football leagues in detail. Today we are going to continue the theme of interviews, and we have a very interesting guest with us. We have the current manager of Uganda national team and the former manager of Sierra Leone and Rwanda national team, Mr. Johnny McKinstry, with us. He was the youngest international manager in the world when he took up the Sierra Leone national team at the ripe age of 27 years. Since then, he has gone on to manage multiple teams across the globe, which included a club in Lithuania and also in Bangladesh. And he has also gone on to manage 3 teams, national teams, by the age of 34. Can you imagine that? So without wasting much time, I would like to first thank Johnny for coming on the show. Thank you so much, Johnny, and welcome to the show. And I'd like to begin by asking you, how are you and what are you doing during this pandemic period?
Well, first of all, thanks very much for having me. It's great to come on and talk football and, just keep up to date with things around the world. Obviously, yes, the world is going through, this challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic. And, here in Uganda, we've been generally quite fortunate in that the government and the Ministry of Health response has been quite good. And so far, we've only got 500 cases and no deaths so far. But the other side of that coin is they have been quite restrictive in their measures. So they ceased public transport. Even for a while, private cars were not allowed on the roads because they wanted to cease movement altogether. So it's made, your daily routine, somewhat different, as it has been for everyone around the world. I'm quite fortunate. I obviously have my home office here. I'm in my office at my house at the moment. And so it really means I've been able to continue on with a number of aspects of work unsort disturbed. The medium and long-term planning projects, we've been doing online sort of tactical classes with a lot of our players. And so we've tried as much as we can to, even though we can't be out on the field with our national team players, that we engage them mentally and, we support them. Because you got to remember, some of these guys, we've got young guys who are 18, 19 years of age who've maybe just moved for the first time away from Uganda to play professional football. And all of a sudden the pandemic happens and they're alone in a different country. And, we're trying to provide support to those guys to make sure they know that connection's still there. And, so it's been an interesting sort of 2 months now. I think on the outside, people might think that in football, because we can't be on the field training, that there's nothing to do. But actually what I found is, I've been remarkably busy, really. And that's been good, because for me anyway, I'm someone who likes to keep busy and who wants to be active. And so at least mentally, we've been able to engage all of the players and continue to move some of our projects forward.
Yeah, so we'll talk about maybe a lighter topic to what's happening around the world, that is football. So, you are so well traveled in terms of your maybe management career. You're still very young in your management career. I would say that it's just been 7-8 years you are into professional management career. So how has the culture been different in the different places that you have been in?
It's been like, culture is one of the big things I love about having had the opportunity to work in so many different places. For me, my decisions of where to go and accept an offer to become a head coach are always based around football. It's always what is the best football opportunity. But when I get to a place, I love to immerse myself in the culture. I'm not I know sometimes, especially in the developing football world, sometimes maybe a foreign football coach comes in and lives in the nice apartment complex, doesn't interact with the local people, whereas for me, I've never wanted to be like that. I consider myself quite a normal person, and I love meeting people and finding out about culture. And, even to give an example, it was a tradition of my assistant coach when we were in Bangladesh that the night before, or if we were ever at an away game in one of the towns or cities around Bangladesh, we would go out and our food the night before a game for just me and him would be local street food. We'd want to go and try whatever that area of Bangladesh, what their speciality was. So we would walk out in the evening, the players would have had their team meal, we would go out, just walk around, and wherever we saw was busy, a street vendor, or we'd go in and ask, what did they recommend? And I think some of our players thought we were a little bit foolish because you never know. But I was like, well, if there's lots of other people, let's try it. And, so for me, culture, food, all of these things are such a huge thing. And, everywhere is vastly different, from Sierra Leone to Ghana to East Africa here, Rwanda, Uganda to Bangladesh, the United States when I was there, Lithuania and Eastern Europe. All, they're so different from each other. But the one thing I found with all of them was the people were all incredibly welcoming and incredibly warm. And I think that's the key. I think if you detach yourself and keep yourself away from the local community, then they will treat you in a certain way. But if you engage with them and you sort of throw yourself into the local culture, well, I think people are very welcoming, and they want to tell you about their culture, and we're eager to learn about culture. So, so far it's been a fantastic experience, and I'm sure there'll be another few experiences to come yet.
So, I'll talk about your first job. So before you had worked at maybe, I think, in youth development with Newcastle and Red Bull and other various groups and companies. So your first major break was in 2013, I guess. It was with Sierra Leone national team, and you did quite well. You took them to new heights. But how did it happen? For you to come to Sierra Leone, which is very outfield or out of the box option, and it's a very adventurous choice from your point of view. How did it happen?
Well, the Sierra Leone national team job was very much, I feel, a case of right time, right place. I was already in the country running a football academy, so I'd moved to Sierra Leone sort of 2.5, 3 years prior to that, and had helped set up and was running and managing a residential football academy, the only one in the country. And so in that sense, I knew the country very well. I'd obviously watched the national team a number of times, and people like within the Football Association knew who I was, and people within football in the country knew who I was because I was running the country's only sort of professional football academy. And so the opportunity to coach the team came up, and the previous coach had resigned. There was 3 World Cup qualifiers left. Sierra Leone had a slim chance of qualifying, still a chance, but not a huge one. And they were looking for a new coach, and at that stage I just felt, look, I looked at the situation and I thought, well, are they going to hand somebody a long contract with 3 games to go in the World Cup, or are they going to look for a short-term measure? And if it's a short-term measure, they'll probably look for a domestic coach. They'll probably look for a Sierra Leonean coach. But I thought to myself, well, I'm living here, so let's make a few phone calls. Let's organize some meetings. And I met with the FA, I met with the Ministry of Sport, and over the course of a couple of meetings sort of presented to them what I felt we could do to not just help the team win in the short term, but also, evolve Sierra Leonean football. And they clearly liked what they heard, and they called me back and said, yeah, we'd like you to come in initially as the interim head coach for the 3 games remaining in the World Cup. and then we would assess it, and ultimately we did reasonably well in those games, and they extended the contract to the African Cup of Nations qualifier. So, but I'm naive to think, had I made that application whilst living in America or London, that I would have got the job. You need a little bit of luck in this life. And for me, I was there already. I was in Sierra Leone, and that made it a lot easier for them to say yes. And but yeah, it's all about taking the opportunities that present themselves to you, and that was an opportunity that I was able to grab hold of.
So like after Sierra Leone, you went to Rwanda, then but you also managed in Bangladesh with Saif Sporting Club. How was your time at Bangladesh?
I loved Bangladesh. It was so the South Asian culture, sorry, not South Indian, South Asian culture is so, it's very unique. It's quite different to the rest of the world. And for me, it's always been a part. Asia in general had always been somewhere I wanted. Many years ago, after I finished with Sierra Leone, I actually spent sort of 6 weeks around Southeast Asia, just watching football and meeting coaches. So I spent some time in Vietnam, in Cambodia, in Thailand, in Malaysia. And so for me, I've always had one eye. I just think technical level, it's really interesting. The technical level of the players, the fact that for a number of Asian countries, physically, there's a smaller stature, and how do you manage that situation when you're coming up, especially on a global level, against maybe bigger teams. And so I've always been intrigued by Asian football, and it was an old colleague of mine got in touch and sort of said there was a club in Bangladesh that he knew were looking for a European coach, and would I be interested? And for me, the club were ambitious, and they were clearly investing money. And for me, I thought, yeah, this looks, why not? That my experience in life, is almost why not? What's the worst that could happen here? If I don't like it, you can always leave. But you might as well go and experience these things and try and win. And so, yeah, I really like Bangladesh. I think, the traffic in Dhaka is not one that I would easily return to. I think Dhaka traffic is the worst I've experienced anywhere in the world. So you really have to, plan your day. But the players were fantastic. There was a good level of quality. They wanted to learn, so hungry to learn. We were able to really engage with the players on a tactical level in terms of getting them to understand what we wanted them to do. And so for me, that ticks all the boxes. Countries that are friendly and welcoming, players who are hungry and eager to learn, who don't have big egos, who are humble. And yeah, so I really enjoyed Bangladesh, and ultimately was going to stay on, for another couple of years. But the opportunity here in Uganda came up, and it was really something that I couldn't turn down. It was too good an opportunity. And but still many good friends in Bangladesh and good relationships. So yeah, it was an enjoyable season.
So I'll talk of your current job, that is Uganda. How is the footballing culture in Uganda? I do not know much about the football in Uganda. So if you, as an insider, if you could enlighten or you could shed some light on the topic.
Football means everything to people here. If I were to walk out of my house now and walk for 10 minutes, I would probably meet 20 different people wearing Uganda national team shirts. It's impossible to go out, especially in Kampala, the capital here, and not see a Uganda shirt every other minute. Football is the centre of so much here. When the national team play, huge expectation for the team to win here. Uganda, in our last 20 home games at African Cup of Nations level, 16 clean sheets. So we've only conceded in 2 of the last 20 home games. So they've got, I think the last time the team lost at home was like 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. So an incredible record, beating, teams like Egypt, like Ivory Coast. The big players of African football come here to Uganda and lose. So culture here, a small crowd for maybe a friendly with a smaller nation might be 25, 30,000 people. But, when the stadium's full, which is most games, it's around 50,000 people turn out. So, and then the game's on TV. So, yeah, the culture it's a real football culture, and people understand the game. You're able to have a conversation here, and people have a good awareness of the game. They watch the local league, they watch foreign leagues. And so, yeah, it's really, Uganda really does have a love affair with the game. And, the challenge now is we're doing well at senior national team level, but our next challenge is we really need to put in place the structures at youth level, which they're doing, we're starting to do in facilities and programs, to really ensure that we take that next step, that we continue to develop talented young players. Sort of generation of Ugandan players. Because for 40 years, Uganda didn't qualify for anything. And then in 2017 and in 2019 again qualified for the African Cup of Nations. And we're currently top of our qualifying group again. And, we also believe we've got a realistic chance to go to the World Cup with this team. So, but we've got to make sure it's not just a golden generation moment. Those structures are in place to take them on the year and make sure we're developing those young players so that in 10 and 20 years' time, you're still seeing Uganda compete at the top level.
So, John, I can't hear you actually. Can you just...
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, fine. So I'll move on to the next question. Like, you have managed 3 national teams and you're just 34 years old. So do you see yourself as a, national team specialist, or do you also want to venture out into clubs in maybe leagues, or do you see yourself confined to the national level?
No, for me, it's about opportunity. It's where presents the best opportunity, whether that's club or national team. Now, the 2 rules are different. The way you go about the job is different. Obviously, with a national team, you have a lot less contact time with your players. But then it means you have to be creative. Like I said before, we have like an online platform where we're currently doing tactical classes with our players. So our players are all around the world, yet we're still able to engage in a learning environment. So it's really important that we adapt, and the environment that we find, that we figure out the correct strategy to help build football in that environment. But for me, it's always about the opportunity. And yes, we've been fortunate. We've had good success at national team level. But equally, when we went to Bangladesh, we set most of the club records in the season we were there. We won more games, scored more goals, collected more points, than they'd ever done before. So I think it's really about the opportunity rather than whether it's a club or a national team.
So although you are very young, okay, in your management career you have had a lot of experience. So if you had to describe your footballing philosophy, what would that be?
Positive is the big word. Both. It's one of the things I think a football team should reflect the character of the coach. I think if you spoke to friends and family of mine, they would probably say some of my personal traits are that I'm very positive, and that I'm somebody who has a hard-working sort of work ethic, someone who when I see challenges, I don't see obstacles, I see opportunities. We've got a big challenge in front of us, but it's an opportunity for us to succeed, to achieve something. And that's my mindset. And I think, therefore, I try to have that transfer across to what you see on the pitch, that I want the players to be very positive. I want them to be, their work ethic to be remarkably high. That I want them to be an attacking team, but I also think I'm a realist. People come and say, is your philosophy to play like Barcelona or Liverpool or Real Madrid? And for me, I'm very clear in how I want my teams to play. I have my idea of football, which is a possession-based attacking game, that when we don't have the ball, we're going to press aggressively. However, I also say, you have to consider the environment that you're in. So the way how we have our football idea or our philosophy, but how we apply that might be different when we're playing at home to a team ranked maybe 100 places below us in the world rankings, as compared to maybe we're playing away against Nigeria, one of the top African teams in Lagos. So my application of my football philosophy might alter slightly. And so I think that's it. It's all through the years I've had the same footballing idea, but the application of it has been somewhat different in the different environments, because you have to consider the players you have available, the environment, how strong a team you are. So, but yeah, positive would be the big word about how I want to play football.
So, I'm continuously touching on the topic that you have traveled a lot in many countries and you have managed at the national level. So, what is the most difficult thing when that you have to adapt to when you come to a new country?
I think trust is a big thing, is getting people to trust you. You've got to remember you're coming in as the outsider, and people sometimes, because of how other people interact, because I'm not naive, I know that over the course of history, some foreign people come into countries and they want to tell people how things should be done, and they take this very old school, military style attitude, you must do this and this, I'm the boss. And so I think when new people, especially from abroad, come into a country, there can be a lack of trust, and people are a little bit hesitant to fully sort of show themselves to you. And for me, I think that's why it's important when you go into a new country is to build relationships, to meet as many people as you can, to talk to people, to have phone calls, to have meetings, to have dinners, and basically, before you even get people to know what you want to do professionally, almost get them to know you personally, and sort of, to break down those barriers. Now, we don't have to be friends with everybody, but I think if people know you on a personal level and can see that you're there in their country with genuine, authentic intentions, that you want to help and you want to develop the game, then I think people get a lot more buy-in. They come on board, and that's what. And then also when the going gets tough, because it always does at some point in football, at some point results maybe don't go the way you want. If you've built those relationships, well, then you'll be supported through those tough times. But if you've not built those relationships, when those tough times come, well, people are going to be, quite happy to see you leave. So I think, trust is the big challenge. How do you get people to trust you? And I think the way you do it is by building relationships.
So the clubs or the countries that you have coached in, they are not the very big players in maybe the footballing world. Sierra Leone, Rwanda, Uganda are not the big players of Africa. So what is the one common mistake you see which the countries are doing, which you have to come and rectify, or you try to rectify?
I think it's it's different for everyone. I think in Sierra Leone, it was the administrative and logistical side. Organizationally, it was very poor, but the players we had were excellent players. Like my Sierra Leone squad, I had my central midfielder played for AC Milan, my striker played for Glasgow Celtic, another striker at Norwich City. I had another player playing in MLS. I had 4 or 5 players playing in France and Sweden. I had another few in the English Championship. So it was a top team. And Sierra Leone should be qualifying for the African Cup of Nations every time. But administratively, it was very poor. And to give you an example of that, basically when I was at the Sierra Leone national team, we only had 3 or 4 full-time members of staff administratively working at the Football Association. Whereas here in Uganda, we have 70 members of staff working full-time at the Football Association, all with different jobs. So in Sierra Leone, there's 4 members of staff. In Uganda, there's 70. And that sort of shows you that when you come to East Africa, generally, the administration and the organization is a lot better in East Africa than it is in West Africa. West Africa can be a bit more haphazard. So, that was a lot to do with that. You come over to East Africa in Rwanda, the challenge was the players didn't have a lot of exposure. 95% of my national team were playing domestically in the Rwandan league. And so when you stepped up to play international football against the likes of Ghana, the Ivory Coast, Senegal, who all their players are playing in the Premier League in England or in La Liga, that's a big step up for these players. And look, we won at home against the Ivory Coast. We drew away against Ghana. So we had some good results, but we really had to gear ourselves up for those games. And that was a big effort on our part. Here in Uganda, it's a bit of the mix of the both. Because in Uganda, we have the logistical support, 70 staff at the FA, but 90% of my A national team play outside of Uganda. Now, they're not in the same level of leagues like the Sierra Leonean players. most of our players are we've got some in Sweden, some in Turkey, in Egypt, in South Africa, but all good quality leagues. And, so it's a bit of a mix here in that we've got the logistics, but we also have players playing at a good level. And ultimately, when you start to get that mix, you see a country that's qualifying for tournaments. So you need it on both sides. If you've only got talent but no, management, you can't do anything. If you've got lots of management but the talent is small, again, difficult to do something. But when those two aspects, on field and off field, come together, that's when you can start to have success and start going forward.
So, I'll get a little bit more tactical. As a coach, which is your go-to formation, if you have one?
Most recently, it's been 4-3-3. But, for example, in Bangladesh, before we left, we were moving the team towards playing 3-5-2. In the past, I've played 4-5-1. I've played 4-4-2 in the past. I'm not fixed to a certain formation. I have a playing style that is, so our game model in terms of how we want to play the game, which again is refined. We have our generic, which is my coach's view of football, how we want to play. We then come into an environment, a club or country, and then we tweak that game model because we look at the culture of the country, we look at the players we have available and say, okay, what small adjustments do we need to make to this game model? But then the game model is completely independent of a formation. The formation is then, how do we get our best players on the pitch together? So if 3-5-2 suits the players we have, then we'll play 3-5-2. At the moment, we feel 4-3-3 suits the Ugandan players that we have available well. But also, there's some young players coming up, and we think in the next 2 to 4 years, we might be able to show them how to play 3-5-2. We feel there's some young players coming up, especially in defence, who might be really suited to playing 3 at the back. So again, that flexibility formationally will help us a great deal.
So, as a coach, do you look up to maybe other coaches and take inspiration from them?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's not just in football as well. Naturally, there's the top football coaches who aren't always necessarily the coaches at the top of the Premier League or winning the Champions League. Now, yes, of course, people like Jurgen Klopp and the way he has his Liverpool and he had his Dortmund team. I was a big fan of him when he was in Dortmund, and how he changed that Dortmund team. I look at a fellow countryman of mine, Brendan Rodgers, and look at how he is a coach first and foremost. Brendan went into Leicester City, and if you remember Leicester City under Claude Puel and even Claudio Ranieri, they were a very counter-attack team. They were low block, fast break. Whereas without signing many players, Brendan has managed to evolve into a really possession-based football team. And sometimes when you change the playing style so drastically with the same players, performance drops. But what you've seen now is Leicester look as though they might just qualify for the Champions League again. And so, Brandon's done a fantastic job there. But equally, I look, even outside of football, I look at, there's some top basketball coaches, top American football coaches who, how they manage people. Because actually being successful in this game, only part of it's the training. How you deal with people and how you create a culture and create an environment is very important. And I feel you can borrow a lot of ideas from other sports. So, Rodgers did a very good job. He's doing a very good job at Leicester, but I have to say that he had the tools in place, like the midfield is amazing what he has there. But although he has done a very good job, the midfield there is amazing. Yeah, but I agree. I agree he has the tools. But ultimately, you've got to ask yourself, why was the previous coach not brave enough, or didn't have the foresight to do what Brendan is doing? Because if the tools were there, it's a toolbox is only as useful as the mechanic who's working on your car. If you take your car to a bad mechanic, it doesn't matter if he has the best toolbox. The mechanic still has to do the job.
So, suppose now this next question, I think you'll have a lot of words to say, and I hope so. Suppose I'm a player, or I'm just a random person, and I want to get into management from tomorrow. What is the first advice you would give to me?
Just get as much experience as possible. I think a lot of young coaches who want to come into the game are in a rush to get to be the celebrity manager on TV. But it's a long journey. There's a great saying, an overnight success, 20 years in the making. Sort of thing. I don't know who said that, but it's almost always true. There's no such thing as an overnight success. It's just that it was overnight that you became aware of it. But these guys have been working for 10, 15, 20 years on their craft. I think the best example I can give is a lot of coaches I see nowadays are in such a rush to do their coaching qualifications. And you need your qualifications, 100%. You need knowledge. However, people want to go and do their C license, and then the next year do their B license, then the next year do their A license, and then the next year try and do their pro license. For me, if you look at my career, at 18, back then there was no C license when I did mine. You did like some certificates that you could do when you were 16, 17 if you wanted, and then you could do your B license when you were 18. So I did my B license when I was 18. I then went to university, I started coaching, I went to New York. Then when I was 23, 24, I did my A license. So there was a 5 or 6 year gap between my B and my A license. Not because I wasn't at the level, but because there was no need for me to get my A license. I was learning the game. And then I did my A license when I was 23, 24. And then I did my pro license when I was 30. So again, you had another 6 6-year gap. So between my B license and my pro license, it took like 12 years, 12, 13 years. Not because I was trying and failing, but because I knew that between each of these stages, I had to learn. And how do you learn? You go out and coach. You coach as many hours as you can. You coach as many players as you can. I'm extremely fortunate that I've coached at every level of the game. Somebody sent me a photograph last week, actually, just someone on the internet. I don't know them, but they'd found an old scrapbook that their father had, I think. And it's a photograph of me when I was like 16 years of age, coaching like an under-8 football team in Ireland. And they sent it, was like, is this you? And it, brings back a lot of memories. But, I've coached 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, I've coached boys, I've coached girls, I've coached summer camps, I've coached academy teams, I've coached, obviously, then into international level, I've coached professional club level. I've done the entire spectrum of the game, and I think that makes me a better coach. And people might say, oh, how does coaching an 8-year-old girls team have any relevance to coaching an international football team? And I would say, well, it's all teaching. It's all how do I communicate a message, and the more environments I'm at, the more situations I'm in, the better I become at communicating that message. But like I said, I once calculated it when I was about 23, 24, when I was doing my A license and I'd been working in America for a few years. I calculated how many hours I'd spent coaching in the previous 6 years or something. And I worked it out that I'd done about 12,000 hours of coaching. Because when I went to America, I was doing like 25 hours a week every week. And I look at that, and so now I'm in my mid-30s, and easily I must have, I've probably done 25, 30, 35,000 hours of coaching on the field. Yet I meet other people who maybe have their A license or have their pro license, and they've maybe not done a quarter of that. And I'm sort of thinking, but that's where you learn to become a coach. Yes, you get some vital information on the coaching licenses, but you've got to go out and get the practical experience, and you've got to make mistakes and then come back and review them. I've made hundreds, thousands of mistakes over the last 20 years, but every time I try to learn from them. So I think that would be my biggest piece of advice. Yes, you need to get qualified, but experience is what helps you get ahead in this game.
So on that note, I'll ask you one final question, Johnathan. Whom do you prefer, Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo?
I cheat when I answer this question. The way I answer this question is, if you picked a random team for me in the world and said you have $100 million to sign one player, who would you sign? And my answer to that question is Cristiano Ronaldo. Because I feel Ronaldo in any environment would win. Whereas my perception is that Lionel Messi probably does best in a certain type of team. In a Barcelona, in an Arsenal, in even Leicester City, we mentioned now, teams who like to play pass and move football. Yet you see when he goes to the Argentine national team that isn't quite so much pass and move. Yes, he still has some amazing performances, but the team doesn't succeed. Whereas Ronaldo, over his career, I think has shown that regardless of the environment, he's going to dominate. And look, they're both amazing players, and I think we've been incredibly fortunate that we've lived in a time where these players are playing, and you can watch them on the TV every week. Like, if you think about it, in the days of Pele, people just had to read about Pele and see some highlights, but they weren't able to watch him every week on the TV. Whereas now, we get to see Ronaldo and Messi every single week, something that previous generations didn't get with those top players. So extremely fortunate. But, you know, the Ronaldo point, I don't know if you saw, I read a piece yesterday that was saying he returned to Juventus training and did all the fitness tests and was stronger and faster than he had been before the pandemic, before the lockdown. So he basically went home and at 35 years of age has made himself faster and stronger in his home environment. And you're like going, the drive to succeed, if you could bottle up that raw determination that he has and that hunger to be the best and give a drop of it out to all the young footballers in the world, it would be remarkable.
So on that note, Jonathan, thank you so much for talking to me, and I wish you all the best with your team, and I hope you can take them to maybe African Cup of Nations and even win it and even qualify for the World Cup. And I wish you all the best and hope we can talk again soon. Take care, stay safe.
Thank you very much.